Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ferdows Al-Ghazi, and I am Director of Contract Management, Green Hydrogen at Mazen. And it is my pleasure to open Panel 7 on the World Power to X Summit. So our panel will focus on certification, on legal frameworks, and it is my pleasure to welcome our panelists here. And for this discussion, we are fortunate to have a distinguished group of leaders among us. So a warm welcome to our panelists. Thank you for being here with us today. So from my left, we have Anne Lapierre, Managing Partner at Bracewell Paris. We have Killian Voss, Partner, Emerald Corclo. We have Patrick Mayo, Chairman, Elisio. Thomas Oleninjak, International Energy Policy Officer at RVO Netherlands. And we have Jonas Smolberg, CEO, GHG. So, achieving global scale will only be possible if these frameworks provide the necessary trust and confidence that the market requires. And let's dive in directly into our discussion. And I will start with you, Anne Lapierre. So you are Managing Partner at Bracewell Paris, and you have been at the front line of complex energy transactions. So today, as PTX projects are requiring cross-border and large-scale coordination, do you see that we are moving towards a market in which the coordination is a risk allocation instrument, or we are starting to see that regulation is becoming an enabler for the market to be launched?
Thank you for your question. I think when we look at the circular of 2024 and the structure of the Moroccan offer, with Mazen as a focal point, and the organization of the executive committee with coordination among the ministries, it's a great start in terms of implementing a new game-changing strategy. But that's not enough. This engagement needs to be replicated at all levels with better coordination between governmental and regional power. And we absolutely need, in order to achieve what has been called this morning by Madame Ben Ali, and this afternoon we just heard, call for implementation and to be economic. So low price and fast implementation. To do that, we need visibility, visibility, and visibility, which means, from a legal standpoint, that a dedicated set of rules, maybe a special law, need to be adopted in order to coordinate the development and the authorizations that need to be delivered for the creation and the erection and the commissioning of an hydrogen or e-fuel project. Because it's not one project, it's many projects. It's a generation of renewable energy project. It's an infrastructure project, but infrastructure means access to the grid, access to the water, access to the pipeline, access to the ports, and it's also obviously the electrolyzer parts. All of these parts needs different authorizations delivered at different level. That's very time consuming, that's not efficient, and last but not least, that's a very slow process. So if we want to transform the ambition of the Moroccan offer and for Morocco to become this leader for which it has all of the great ingredients, there is a need to have a dedicated law in order to set aside the current existing regime and to have a clear and consistent framework in which the private investor can safely develop their project. De-risking, interface rings, all of that lack of visibility in terms of timing creates massive contingencies for EPC contractor, for investor. So we can't reach price parity with grey hydrogen if this issue is not fixed. If we look, for example, on average, what can be done elsewhere for port, in the world, the average concession time when there is a project is 18 months. For the time being here, we've got a certain number of discussion, and we need to understand how we balance the sovereign right with the private investor control and investment. But all of that has to be done, and has to be done quickly. Otherwise, the process is going to be very, very slow. And I had the chance to advise Mazen for 15 years on the development of their projects. That was not easy, that was a learning curve, but that was a massive success. I'd just like to point out, to give an example of what I'm just saying in terms of need of visibility. I like to remind the audience that the first tenders that Mazen did, the site was provided to the private investor. Site provided was meaning water was there, high voltage line was there, roads were there, and then the private investor had to build, but there was no risk of the infrastructure not being available because that was a commitment which was made from Mazen in the tendering process.
Thank you. So taking over from the private investment perspective, and I'm addressing to you, William. So you are a partner at MRL, and you have seen that many PTX projects are emerging in countries in which regulation is still catching up. So in your opinion, how can private investors and host countries work together to strike the right balance, ensuring the viability of the project while avoiding an over-reliance on state guarantees?
Thank you very much for the question. And I think the simple answer is that in the green hydrogen industry, it is normal, it is absolutely normal that investments at the present point of time will heavily rely on the state guarantees, and also a regulatory framework created by the state. And the reasons, I think, are simple. The technology and the engineers around may forgive me, is comparatively new, at least to people who are supposed to finance the projects. The market, and we heard this just again from His Excellency the Minister's speech, the market is yet to develop. And the third point is what is positive. Many investors come to Morocco because there are opportunities in the field of green hydrogen, but they come for the first time. They're not familiar with the legal and regulatory environment here in Morocco. So yes, I say regulation matters, and I think that Morocco is blessed to have a government that is dedicated to developing that regulatory environment, and that with the Offre de Maroc has taken an important step towards further improving this regulatory environment. Now, our law firm would also work in neighboring countries where the regulatory situation is much worse. And what my message to investors is, where regulation is weak, the contract matters. Spend time and thought on designing the right contractual framework that will serve as a substitute for the regulation. So where the state is absent, the investor is called to find an alternative through the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving to you, Patrick, as previous panels has mentioned and talked about certification a lot, and you are chairman of Initio, which has been deeply involved in certification and guarantees of origin. So how can these schemes be standardized globally to avoid fragmentation and ensure consumer trust? And what is at stake if we fail to ensure this common certification process?
Thank you for the question. Aligning everyone globally on something is a big task. And I suspect it will be a never-ending story. Before I start trying to get some hints, I'd like to first thank the organizers for this invitation. And I'd like to, I don't know if Mr. Minister is still in the room or not, but I love these words, and I would suggest him to take a flight and share those words in Brussels with the same level of enthusiasm and energy that he shared with us here, because I think they need to, in Brussels, to understand his viewpoint, which I suppose is correct from a local perspective. So coming back to the globalization of standards and certification schemes for hydrogen, I'll start with the second part of your question. Is this a problem if we don't reach it? And there are, the glass is half full and half empty in a way. It is problematic because one of the beauties of hydrogen and derivatives is the opportunity to replace existing commodities with new commodities with green attributes. And we know that the success of oil and gas, globally speaking, has been its versatility and its ability to address markets globally with more or less the same molecules. And not having this possibility is, in terms of global trading, bad news. In terms of cost optimization, bad news. But we need to start somewhere. So the ultimate goal is there. If you look back at the history of oil, there were plenty of different standards of oil with different physical properties addressing, local markets, and steadily but surely all that consolidated. And I think we will go through that process also in this industry. And it may take time. Is it a problem, doctor? Not really. I don't think so. You have certification schemes that today operate that are compliant with RFNBO rules in Europe. You have 3 of them. We've initiated one of them 10 years back. It's called Certify, and it took just exactly 10 years to get it adopted by the European Commission last December. So things that take time. But the good news is that it's not in front of us, it's behind us. So now you can work with it. And other schemes also function. So it's not perfect, but we have to start somewhere. And those things exist, and we have to use them. There are plenty of industries, if you think about it, where you have, in fact, you don't have global standards. You have regional standards. Is it perfect? No. Does it work? Yes.
Thank you. So I'm picking up from what you have said about we need to start somewhere. And the certification process has started from the EU. And from this perspective, and addressing to Thomas, as you are an international energy policy officer at RVU, Netherlands, and the EU has positioned itself also as a first mover for delegated acts for ambitious import targets. So from your perspective, how can Europe ensure this leadership in setting global benchmarks, but at the same time keep the regulatory framework pragmatic and adaptable to larger scale market realities?
Thank you very much, Fidouz. That's a very good question. Let me briefly start with thanking the organization for inviting RVO to represent themselves here. For those who don't know, we are an organization. We are part and parcel of the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs, and one of our many tasks is to implement the Netherlands government's hydrogen policy, both domestically as well as internationally. We don't do that by ourselves. We do that in collaboration with many multilateral organizations and partner countries such as Morocco. So on your question, I agree that Europe right now is in a kind of position where we have the opportunity to kind of set the tone for the international Power-to-X market. And in a way, that could be called a position of strength, but it also comes with a lot of risks, because the question is Europe going to set the benchmark in a way that allows others to also join in, or is it going to set the bar in a way that blocks others out? And well, of course, the RFNBO rules are a very good example and illustration of exactly that. So the objective, I don't think anyone disagrees that it's a good objective. No one would argue that we don't need some kind of system to make sure that the hydrogen that's going to be produced is actually renewable, it's actually green, and then, of course, as the Excellency, the Minister just mentioned, it could be a little grey or a little greener, but we need it to be green. We shouldn't have greenwashing, let's say. But also, we often hear voices say that we should be adapting the rules, that they are maybe too strict, that they might be too complicated, and maybe they might be too early for the market. That is basically right now at this stage a nascent market. And I personally doubt that the EU is going to change the rules and the definition of green hydrogen anytime soon. And also Commissioner Jorgensen, he confirmed that earlier this week. This is not going to happen anytime soon. And in a way, I agree with that. I think the stability really is essential. We need that stability. If we keep reopening this kind of debate about what's green and what's not green each time, then it also undermines investor confidence. An investor needs to know what they're up to. And the RFNBO framework, as you mentioned, it's not ideal, it's not perfect, but it does provide what the sector needs. A balanced foundation that also respects the environmental integrity, and it gives early projects room to move. So there are revisions scheduled. I think the first one is scheduled for 2028. That means predictability. We know when and how the rules are going to change. So this is good. I think what we really need to do is explain this framework a lot, especially outside Europe. It's not always perfectly understood. It's complicated. We as an organization, RVO, we do that in collaboration with firms like yours, like Inicio, Patrick's company. We, for instance, did a 2-day workshop a couple of months ago in Rabat with for the Moroccan audience, private sector as well as government. We took 2 days just to talk about, to explain the RFNBO system, to discuss it, to answer questions, and we're going to do something similar in 1 week in Cairo, in Egypt. If there's any Egyptian visitors to the summit, and you're not invited, and you can free up 7th of October in your agenda, you're more than welcome to attend. So what we see in these kind of gatherings, in these kind of workshops and get-together is that if the framework is clear and it's stable, then in the end that will get the capital to flow. It will move. And this is also what we saw in the recent study that we released as RVO on synthetic aviation fuels on ESAF. We looked at projects in 7 countries. One of them was Morocco. A lot of potential here. 2 very promising ESAF projects already started, but those are not moving forward because there's a natural demand for ESAF. These are moving forward because of regulation and because of policy. So, answering your question, I think what we need to do, we need to show leadership. We shouldn't do that by constantly changing the rules, making new rules, but by being very clear and very open about what we want to do.
Thank you. And if we take it a little beyond Europe borders, and I'm addressing to you, Jonas, you are the CEO of GH2, and we often talk about the role of international institutions. In your opinion, what role could be played by these international organizations and trade institutions to help push forward regulation and standards for the global PTX markets?
Thank you. One way to answer that is we published a letter yesterday to the European Commission saying, please don't change the rules. Listen to what the commissioners are saying. Keep the investment climate clear. Exactly what Anne was saying. And what Morocco can do, you've got to offer, you've got amazing political leadership from both ministers, but we now need that clarity to make sure that we can have the investments. As much as it is my job to attract foreign direct investment to Morocco and the region and so on, let's face it, it's happening way too slowly. There's one chair that is empty over here, and we can maybe put that bottle there and it can signify what's happening in China at the moment. We work very closely with many friends there. It's happening very fast. They can now sell green ammonia at $600 a ton ready from port. They've started to export last month in September. They started their developments after many of the first steps were taken here and in some of the neighboring countries. So we are not as fast as we need to be. We need to work with a laser-sharp focus, and as Anne said and as you said, in figuring out where are the bottlenecks. And if we look then a little bit on that, and I will then come on to where the standards issue is, there are certain issues on the government side here that just have to happen faster with greater visibility, predictability. We also know that the major issue, we can't get away from that, is the lack of demand, lack of customers abroad and so on. And the EU, of course, needs to do more on that side in providing predictability, and in particular, EU needs its bloody mandate, excuse my language, but there are legal mandates that have been agreed. They need to be followed. So that is a very clear demand drive that needs to happen. When it comes to some other things that can absolutely help with this empty demand, we haven't spoken so much about it, but it is the International Maritime Organization. We asked one of the big intelligence agencies how much green ammonia will be traded in 2040. They said 240 million tons, of which 200 would be for shipping. That gives us an idea. The figures might be off, don't care, but just a proportion. 200 out of 240 million tons. Morocco did not vote in favor of the decisions at IMO in April. It can sort that out now in October. Morocco, the best thing the government can do to help renewable energy in this country and many others is to support the decision. We have an unprecedented opportunity with that in the IMO. So there is one standard where international organizations and our governments can do us a massive favor in driving the demand for our sector. Let me just lastly mention one thing in terms of the various things that needs to happen. And it is, of course, the cost of capital. One of the reasons it's happening so fast in China is that the government is helping, driving down the cost of capital, essentially lending for very, very low rates. Now, most of our governments can't do that, but we can do more. And the multilateral development banks, our European development banks, state agents and guarantee agencies and so on, we need to work much better together in countries like Morocco, not just at headquarters, but here, to look at innovative finance solutions to further drive down the cost of capital.
Thank you. So Mr. John standing up reflects that it is less about nowadays the technology, whether it works, but it's more about whether the rules are clear, predictable, and trustworthy for everyone and for the investors to move forward. So thank you for your insight. And looking ahead, and I'm addressing to you, Anna-Pierre, legal frameworks we need to adapt to carbon border, to green finance, and to larger scale infrastructure. And taking a bit John's perspective, do you think that the legal framework is looking as going to be convergent, or do you see a higher risk of having regional markets developing?
Thank you for your questions. I think the first step is probably a risk to have regional markets to start with, but I'm pretty confident that at some point, if the demand is there, business is business, so we will have an adjustment. And when we look at the LNG market, for example, my personal view is that the H2 ammonia or e-fuel market should not be massively different. But Jonas made a very, very strong point here. We need to have, in order to have this global legal framework in place, we need to ensure that we all support the same vision. So, for example, the IMO decision maybe needs to be taken into consideration, because that will have a massive impact on demand and on the price at delivery, which obviously include the transport cost. From a financing standpoint, I think there is no limitation but the interface risk. I think there are today a large number of banks and lenders and investors ready to invest money, in particular because some of them, if not most of them, have made very strong declaration to go away from financing oil. So I don't think that the problem is the shortage of cash at the moment. The problem at the moment is the lack of offtake. It's obviously the de-risk situation, the lack of visibility in terms of timing, the lack of stability in terms of legal framework, and the interface risk between all of those projects, which for the moment make not only investors but lenders very, very reluctant. How can you finance an infrastructure of 1 or 2 billion in terms of generation and hydrolyzer, and then at the end you're ready to go, but there is no pipeline, or the port is not ready? You know, who can bear that kind of cost? I think nobody is ready to take that kind of risk. So I'm very optimistic that the money is there, but once again, we need to provide much more visibility and comfort to the investors. Another example could be, for example, access to water to the grid. We would need to have visibility on what is the capacity of the grid at the moment. We know the very ambitious plan of ONE to reinforce high voltage grid, which is great, but we also need to have visibility on the number of projects, particularly 3009 projects, which are in the waiting list, in order to better understand when you're an investor where your project could rank in terms of grid connection, what would be the cost of connection, what would be the standardized grid connection agreement, and all that kind of thing. And in water, it's the same questions. There is obviously in Morocco, and it's totally legitimate, control over water, because we need to prioritize drinkable water, then we prioritize agriculture, and then we prioritize industry. The question is that if you build in the Moroccan Sahara dedicated project with dedicated access to the water, are those investors under the same type of rules, or are their investment, or could their investment be dedicated to the project they're running? Because as David was mentioning, those projects need massive amount of water. If you cut water, you cut production. So all of those questions need to be addressed. But if they're addressed in terms of a global market and global financing, I think that should not be an issue, because the amount of money available to finance this project is there. But the risk is too big for the moment to attract this money. And I'd like to go on that. Let's keep in mind that it's a competitive process. Jonas was mentioning, I mean, 80% of the hydrogen projects in operation today are in China. And Morocco has got a big opportunity and hubs. your partners are also your competitors in terms of Mauritania, Namibia, Chile. So the first country which will structure its legal framework and its attractiveness and give visibility and security will attract the investment first.
Yeah. So taking from your optimistic point of view on the subject, which also reflects on the market as we're talking more and more, not only about pilot projects, but about larger scale projects. We are now connecting countries. Infrastructure is being cross-border. And to you, Kilian, as a law firm, given that we are connecting different countries with different jurisdictions, in a contract point of view, how can we work and harmonize this jurisdiction in a way that helps these contracts to still be enforceable?
Thank you very much, Vinod. This actually is a daily challenge. And I can only say something about the approach I would be taking to these issues. And I think it depends on three issues, basically. One is you need the right contract. The second point is you need the right dispute resolution mechanism. And third, and that probably is the hardest, you need the right culture. You need the right team to work on the transaction. If I shall say something about the right contract, of course, start with the international standard, and the international standard is evolving. There is a good basis in the international energy industry that also can be used for green hydrogen projects. So the basis always should be the international market standard, and you can then easily adopt it to the requirements of a local jurisdiction also in a country like Morocco. The second point, and that is more important, is that you align the dispute resolution mechanism across the various contracts. Because this is my experience, at least as a lawyer, it often is more important who interprets a contract than what is written in a contract, especially if you have a dispute. So a reasonable arbitration clause that safeguards that the contract is interpreted by people who actually understand the standard is more important than to have the perfect contractual arrangement. Third, and this I think is hardest, how do you get there? And there I would say what you need are multidisciplinary teams, and we at Amarella would work, we are an international law firm focusing on the MENA region, we would work in teams consisting of Arab and international lawyers working together on the same level. And the same applies for technical expertise that you have to import into the agreement. You need multidisciplinary teams. So this is what would be my takeaway: the right contract, the right dispute resolution clause, and all this with the right team. Thank you.
Thank you. And when we talk about regulation, we link regulation a lot with the governmental institution and with the state strategies. And I'm addressing to you, Patrick, as you have advised both governments and private investors. In your experience worldwide, which policies or incentives have truly unlocked some private investment in the PTX sector, and which mechanisms or well-intended mechanisms have ended at the end of the day counterproductive?
Thank you. Very interesting question. One has to have a bit of humility here. I think many of the policies are being designed and rolled out, and we don't necessarily have enough time to actually be able to measure the output and recalibrate. But there are 6 types of things which we've observed that, generally speaking, produce very interesting effects seen from the private sector and project development standpoint. Contracts for different schemes are interesting. There is a market reality, and the ministry and everyone today challenge whether the market is there or not. What is clear is that the usual way of buying these types of products is not to sign a 20-year contract. Traders, when you talk about signing 20 years of tech contracts, they're like, okay, but you are telling me that all the trading optimization that my trading floors are doing every day, all that and throw it away, and I'm going to sign a contract for 20 years and then I'm going to play golf. That's not the reality. The reality is that if you take the aviation sector, in general, airlines buy fuel for 6 or 12 months max. So how can you commit, for 10 or 20 years or even 6, 7 years? That's just not possible. So those mechanisms are there to cut in pieces in a way and remunerate the contract for the difference. The non-harmonization global, we are supporting project developers which are extremely interested in this mechanism because they respond to a market failure. Yeah? And it's interesting that apparently India is also developing such a scheme, so there's probably a good ground for further development there. The second policy initiative that we see as very solid is to set binding targets and don't change them. I agree with my fellow here, Thomas. Whether the targets are right or not, we don't quite know. We will know by then, right? But if you change the targets every now and then the investment decision is absolutely difficult. So the good example is RefuelEU. We have in Europe a mechanism where, in fact, the fuel distributors have the obligation to integrate 2% of SAF by 2025, 6% of SAF by 2030, and ultimately 70% by 2050. And that creates the market in itself. And I can tell you there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of lobby in Brussels to break those rules. And I sincerely hope that the people in the Commission will not change those, because if they are there to stay, then investors can progress in confidence. So setting binding targets and stick to those. Many people ask me, should we go for technology push policies or market pull policies? We've tried both. In Europe, there's been years and years of financing technology development and market and technology push, and that has worked to the level that we had equipments ready to go to the market. But now you see the other side of the picture, the other side of the equation. And in the US, they've decided with IRA to do a market pull mechanism. And everyone approved it in the first wave, but then people realized, well, in fact, that's maybe not enough. So the conclusion is you probably need both. Incentivizing early movers is important. We need to find the policies where you create an incentive which fades away over time for early adopters to remunerate an extra remuneration to compensate for the extra risk they take because they're starting. And that is often a difficulty for governments to accept. But you have to do it. Definitions alignment. It was funny, the minister was looking for the right word, and I suspect he was looking for the word biogenic CO2. That's a concept we actually invented. And then other concepts like bidding zones were invented, and additionality. I came across people for governments in Africa. What is this additionality thing that you invented in Brussels? Well, I don't know if it's good or bad. What I know is that words matter. And if reusing some of those concepts and some of those definitions is possible, I would strongly encourage it, because it allows, it facilitates understanding of what is the meaning of policies. And then just to finish, here in Morocco, we've worked with Innovix and Hydrogen on pre-certification, and that's a first in the country. And I think this is something the government could very well encourage. And that's a quick win. And why? Because before you make very holistic policies, it's very good to work based on the ground, based on the projects that are there, with their specificities, their architectures, because those ones, they exist, so you're not in theory, maybe things, no, projects are there, so how do you actually certify that those projects, with the architecture they have, can actually produce molecules which can be traded with a premium price on the European market, and they are compliant. So these are a set of suggestions.
Thank you for your insights on the subject, and still moving on the government policies. And from your perspective, Thomas, how can governments design policies around national priorities while still keeping aligned with international standards? From your perspective as an energy policy officer, it should be a big challenge. So how can we have sovereignty with compatibility instead of having sovereignty versus compatibility?
Yes, well, sovereignty. I would say every government wants to protect its sovereignty, right? That's the most important job of any government. That means a lot of things in the context that we're discussing right now. I would say probably sovereignty has a lot to do with keeping jobs, creating jobs, also industrial development, energy security, those kind of things. And every government needs to do that. If they don't do it, they don't protect the sovereignty, that means they're not a very good government, I would say. So, the challenge is probably in, as you mentioned, how to do that while still connecting to the international frameworks, right? So, I can maybe give an example of how we try and do it in the Netherlands, because we are, of course, a trading nation, but not just that, we are also an industrial nation. We have a significant chemical industry, steel industry as well. They are very big employers, and our economy is also dependent on those kind of industries. And the same goes for the ports. But we need to green those industries, and we need to green those ports. We need to make them part of our, let's say, decarbonized economy, without, and this is the challenge, making life so difficult for them that they actually don't want to stay in our country. This is a real risk. So what we try and do is to focus on greening those industries and greening the ports and keeping them there. So the steel and the chemical plants, they are preparing for green hydrogen, and the port authorities are preparing to actually become a hub for green hydrogen, like we see in Rotterdam and in Amsterdam as well. Quick example, 2 days ago our government signed a deal with Tata Steel to green, to make basically their Dutch industry, the Dutch plants, greener, to start the transition there. And this is a really ambitious plan, because they're going to have to do a lot of things. They're going to have to shut down the blast furnaces, they're going to have to build electric arc furnaces, and they're going to have to prepare all the equipment for hydrogen. This is a lot of work. So it requires a big investment too. There's a price for all these different things. Now what we're estimating is it's going to cost about 6.5 billion euros. It could probably be a lot more as well, of which the government, the state, is prepared to support about 2 billion euros. So this is a lot of money, and all this is done within the EU framework. For one thing, the 2 billion aid package needs approval, EU state aid approval, so this is necessary, and the whole business case for green steel in itself is dependent on European climate law, on the ETS, on CBAM, on RFNBO, all these different things. But they need to. If Tata Steel does not decarbonize, then they cannot stay competitive in the European market, and so this is the only option. And the decision to support them in this way is compatible with EU rules and it's necessary for our national sovereignty. So this is what we do. And so they go hand in hand, they go together. And so you could apply something like that here in Morocco too. For instance, the certification scheme in Morocco, it has to reflect Moroccan realities, like there's things like water scarcity. We've heard a lot about that today. Also land use, local value creation, these kind of things. But it also needs to connect with the EU rules like RFMBO. And a new policy needs to look inwards, so does it reflect the interests of our country and does it also align with the international interests? We would also be more than happy to support the government, the Moroccan government with designing a scheme like that in collaboration with partners like Inicio, like Certified, as many others that we could do something like that with. But it's necessary. We need to do these kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm taking from your answer two key elements, which are the competitiveness of the business model and the certification. And I will add to them what the Minister have emphasized earlier about the offtake agreements. And addressing to you, Jonas, offtake agreements are key to WorldPtX markets. And you are still mentioning the importance of certification. Do you see certification playing an increasingly decisive role in the offtake agreements in terms of impacting the price, the contract terms, or even the readiness of off-takers to commit?
So, I think what we're starting to see is that market with different kinds of products attributes. So, the early green ammonia that is now coming out of India, for example, much of that is not RFMBO, for example. It's not hourly matched, and some of it is grid connected, where you will have a quite significant associated emissions. So in that sense, it's starting to become clear that standards, whether it's hourly matching, additionality, these things that Patrick spoke about or not, is starting to become an impact. Now, you could say, oh, it'd be great if we had common standards throughout the world. Yeah, that would be lovely. But the fact is that we all have different energy profiles. Some countries have a lot of solar, some have wind, some are, as lucky as you and have both. Some have a very big oil and gas industry, others don't. Some import a lot, others don't. All of those things are absolutely key in determining the kinds of standards, both on the producing side and on the selling side, that one has. It's just a fact. And for that reason, I think, yeah, it'd be nice if we can have standards that communicate with each other, so that we make it easy for trade, but we also got to be open and honest about the fact that we will like slightly different standards. Again, if you believe in green or if you believe in blue, has a massive impact on what kind of standards you're currently pushing globally. So I think one has to be open and direct about that. What does that mean and translate to here in Morocco? We know that there is a massive market across the Mediterranean. EU has committed to 20 million tons. That is what it thinks it needs by 2030. We saw in the big Clean Energy Hydrogen Monitor report published yesterday, with a bit of luck, maybe we'll have a tenth of that. So there is a desperate need just there, for example. Supermarket, okay? Are we doing everything we can to make sure that products that come out of Morocco is RFMBO? That has quite specific questions related to renewable energy certification and some other forms of licensing and things. Those are the kinds of regulatory barriers, if you like, that we with razor-sharp focus should try to solve in places like in this country to deliver on the aspiration that the ministers have spoken about.
Thank you. So as a conclusion, and this has been a very interesting discussion. I think that your collective insights have shown that legal frameworks are starting to shift from being perceived as a barrier to becoming an enabler for the PTX market. And to conclude, I will invite each one of you to answer in one concise sentence. If you were to advise policymakers on one strategic move to unlock the PTX market, what would it be? And I will start with you, Anne.
I would recommend to have a dedicated derogatory law specific for those projects, changing the authorization process, describing exactly what is needed, what is the content of the application, and providing for a mandatory timing for the administration to answer. We need visibility over the content, we need visibility regarding the authorization, but we need visibility as well in terms of timing. So that's really what I would be looking forward, is to have a derogatory law so that we extract those projects and we accelerate them without being faced of the millefeuille of legal rules which are currently applying. Morocco is currently changing its mining code. It's got a draft for guarantee of origin and carbon credits. Still looking to have a gas code. All of that are moving pieces. So my recommendation would be, if you want to be quick, you need to isolate this type of project and ensure they've got a fast track for permitting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I rarely advise governments, so I don't know really whether I have an answer to your question, but I can tell you what I would tell private investors, what would be my takeaway. This would be, don't always wait for the state. Regulation matters. Let's see what you can regulate in your contract. Thank you.
I suppose there's no silver bullet, but at the end of the day, what is the objective of all this? What are we aiming for? I suppose the goal is to address climate issues and greenhouse gas emission reduction. And hydrogen is just a mean to achieve that objective, which is much bigger, right? And from that perspective, I would highly recommend to put in place some kind of CO2 pricing mechanism to any government which doesn't have that in its toolkit.
Clear, thank you. Thomas.
Well, policymakers are, in my opinion, what they should do. And at the risk of repeating myself, but I believe they should be clear about what they want, because that shows leadership. And not just writing rules right in Brussels, but going to a place like this and telling the people that you want to work with, the partners, what do you actually want. I think it would be much appreciated.
Clear, thank you. And we'll finish with you, John.
Thank you. Shall we go for a drink? Once you have Anne's law, or before that, I would appoint a government czar for green hydrogen economy, whose job it is to bring together government entities and address bottlenecks. And the first thing I suggest that person would do would be to tell his European neighbors in the north and the European investment banks and so on to start to coordinate themselves here in country in a much more effective way.
Thank you very much. And an applause for our panelists. Thank you.